in between. Yeah, I actually be honored to have been part of the working group of this individual exercise. And I can tell you it was a 3-year job to do until we came up with the principles. And the whole first year, we basically spent on discussing terminology. Because ownership, title in rent, property, are so different structures across the globe that we really found it difficult to find a mutual language to discuss, these principles on a global basis. So ultimately, what we came up with was that we tie these questions relating to digital assets to control. We agreed on the term control. All right, so today I'm actually intending to deliver a speech which is not my normal content, so to speak. Typically, I'm also talking about regulation like Alireza and Mario just did. But since last year, I'm teaching the cybersecurity and business course at Berlin University. And when preparing for that, I stumbled across this thing here. Who had heard of the UN Cybercrime Convention before? You did? All right. That's good. But only very few. And I think this topic really needs more attention. So what is it about? It is basically about the idea how nations can collaborate better when there is a cybersecurity event happening. Cybercrime doesn't respect any borders, right? You can get attacked from 1,000 kilometers away. So the idea is very much straightforward: create international rules and frameworks to enable states to cooperate swiftly to fight the threats. So this convention is supposed to assist authorities in tracing cybercriminals faster and bringing justice within days or weeks instead of years. That's simple. But let's set the frame from another perspective. So you two raise your arms knowing the Cybercrime Convention, remain silent for a bit. Let's ask the rest. Who do you think drafted this UN Convention? Any idea? So typically it's a country, right? Applying for a new convention, drafting it, lobbying for it. So who was this? It was not the US. We run out for Okay, I'm trying to be loud enough to be heard anyway. So, it was Russia. And it was pushed through with the support of China and Serbia, some other countries. So this thing here has nothing to do with how legal it should be, right? And that's why it needs more attention. It had been adopted on the 24th December last year, without having been on the agenda 2 days earlier, right? And it had been passed without any vote. So you can see how that thing was passed in that UN General Assembly. And now we have it. So we need to deal with it. So basically they tricked us. All right. So it's also very nice how they call this treaty in Russia internally. It's called the Global Data Accession Agreement. That's what this is looking for. And it's supposed to be supposed to fight information crime. Since when is information a crime? Since now. Against this background, I would like to highlight the main issues with this convention, which is broad and vaguely defined scope of the activities that it criminalizes, and then add intrusive investigation power without proper legal safeguards to the mix, plus mandate extensive international collaboration. And here we go. Global Data Accession Agreement created. So let's look into the scope of criminalization, so the actions which are criminalized by that convention. And keep in mind that our freedom is also based upon our fourth power, which is effective journalism, and the work of human rights defenders. Our security also relies upon ethical hacking, right? People testing things and finding loopholes to spot flaws in our IT security. All of these important roles need room to maneuver. So keep that in mind when talking about cybercrime. The definitions that the Convention uses of the activities which are supposed to be criminal are very broad and vague. They use terms like intentional access, illegal interception, misuse of devices, digital interference, which can all be twisted by authorities. Testing, interestingly enough, is only mentioned once in the whole Convention, in the context of misuse of devices. But it's not added to any other of the criminal offenses like intentional access. So how can you do ethical hacking when intentional access does not permit any testing? So basically you can say this convention criminalizes ethical hacking. And imagine a journalist exposing corruption using leaked information she accessed online. Is she a hero or is she a criminal? In an environment of vague legal boundaries, legitimate whistleblowers, journalists and researchers could find themselves quickly labeled as cybercriminals. So clarity matters deeply. Next concern, intrusive investigative powers. So the Convention lets authorities collaborate at light speed. It arms governments with real-time interception, retention orders, and evidence sharing processes via metadata streaming. It improves extradition, admittingly subject to dual crime, which means that the activity must be a crime in the country who made the request and also in the country where this request is going to. But hey, even some Western states criminalize, for example, critique of kings, etc. Right? So that's maybe not a relevant order. In summary, that speeds up law enforcement ability to respond to threats across borders and helps authorities to trace criminals, however defined, faster. But without stringent oversight of these tools, they become easily instruments of repression, specifically because these investigative powers come with the lack of transparency. So you're not supposed to be told that you have been observed, right? So how can you ask for remedy when you don't even know? So the risk of misuse is substantial. Surveillance under that convention might become the new norm. So the cooperation mandated by this convention is not limited and does not exclude autocratic regimes. Therefore, governments known for their constant violation of human rights are not excluded from leveraging the cross-border cooperation mechanisms. So the question is, will we really trust all states equally? And I mean, you can do the exercise. How many democratic and really, living up to the rule of law states do you know across the globe? The United Nations has roughly 200 countries being members of the United Nations. How many of those are actually living up to the rule of law? I think it's not more than 40. So we are a minority, globally speaking. And I can see us, living up to the rule of this law, but, most other countries won't. So we need to create transparency in order, to shelter ourselves. Our role here in Europe, we are really accustomed to robust protections for privacy and digital rights. Think of our strong GDPR, which is sometimes really a pain, but however, it gives us some protection. And thus, I really believe we carry the responsibility to demand that at least the construction of this convention reflects our values, right? So we cannot do anything against this convention as such anymore. And it will become applicable once 40 states adopted it. And as we just did the head count, 40 democratic states versus roughly 160 not that democratic states, it is no question that this thing will become valid sooner or later, whether we adopt it or not. But if we don't adopt it, we won't have a say in the secondary legislation, which will contain the construction of the broader terms. And that's, I think, why we are forced to adopt it as well, so that we remain at the table. And our Europe's voice must be very clear. Security, yes, obviously, we also want to live in a secure world, but not at the cost of fundamental freedoms. So, what can we actually do? Firstly, we can clarify, or we can work towards clarification of the broad definitions by proper construction, taking into account limitations set by human rights and recommended local law. Clear understanding will limit room for abuse. Second, take into account human rights safeguards when asked for cross-border cooperation. That's something that we need to look for within our jurisdiction, that our jurisdiction makes sure that it only collaborates as far as human rights are not violated. And then build stringent local oversight and accountability mechanisms. No state actions, specifically foreign state actions, without scrutiny. Separation of power is a building block of our democracies, and we should not permit this to circumvent this. And finally, this is a precondition to the other one, create transparency wherever possible, and channels for civil society input. So let's remember, cybersecurity isn't just about catching criminals, and Europe's digital future does not exclusively depend on security, but on keeping the internet a place of trust, freedom, and openness. Preserving digital and privacy rights protects the very foundation of our democratic societies. So, invitation to all of you, please spread the word. Any question?
How come there hasn't been so much discussion about this convention? I mean, at the European level, at the European level, how come we haven't had this discussion before? I mean, this is something that you already yourself, having this little background, came across due to the fact that you've been asked to teach a class. So I'm just trying to figure out how come the different European member states haven't brought this forth for public consultation, for discussing in the European Parliament, for discussing within the EU member states in order to identify the way that either we can adapt or, minimize the impact of violating human rights. Yeah. Because eventually this will lead to that.
Yeah. Pretty much certainly will. Yeah, I actually don't really know. And that's why I said, even though this is not my core topic, I'm going to use any invite to speak on the conference to talk about this, right? Because this really needs more attention. I also wondered, I have never read about this in any daily newspaper or something before. Although this was a year-long process, right? So this did not come overnight. I think it was at least 2 to 3 years that it was sitting in the UN Convention General Assembly, and it was the first draft where actually the Russians proposed that it should come into effect when only 10 countries signed up to it. I mean, that's ridiculous. Typically, the number is about 60 to 70. And during the course of negotiations, they were able to raise it to 40, which is still very low. So I would say the other side of things were very clever at using the mechanisms to reach the best outcome for them. And now that it comes to adopting this thing, we really need to start to talk about it, right? And not blindly adopt it. Right, thank you. Thanks.